And welcome to Connected Conversations for Creatives, a place where creatives like you can learn, grow, and connect. I'm your host, Jennifer Carr. In a world that often tries to box us in with judgments and norms, sometimes we have to be willing to push back and refuse to be defined by or held back from unleashing the creativity flowing through us. But pushing back is not always as easy as it sounds, especially when the voices we're pushing against come from inside our own minds. And sometimes our emotions run high or run away from us altogether. And sometimes our creativity is stifled because we give too much weight to the opinions of others. The good news is you can fight back against these voices and you don't have to do it alone. Today's guest has an incredible journey bridging the worlds of journalism, therapy, creative coaching, and the performing arts. A Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist turned licensed marriage and family therapist, she helps creative souls unlock their potential while embracing their sensitivity through workshops and counseling designed specifically for creatives like you. So if you're ready to learn more about creating a community of support and encouragement geared toward those with the heart of an artist, you'll be just as excited as I am to meet Rachel Moore. Welcome to the show, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. That was a really awesome intro, and I can tell you used some wordsmithing with my with my information, and it sounds amazing. I was like, all right, like that was a good edit, so thank you.
Oh, absolutely. I want people to know what they're getting into and who they're about to meet because it excites me as well. You know, when I was doing my research, I was like, this is going to be a really fun conversation because you approach creativity and art from a slightly different perspective, I think, than a lot of people who, you know, the creativity coaches out there and that kind of thing. But you also have a deeper background when it comes to therapy, which is a totally different ballgame from just coaching. So I can't wait to get into that. But first, just tell us a little bit about you. Tell us your story.
Sure. Okay. Where to start? Let's tell the creative story. So, well, I was first reading when I was 3, and then, writing books at 5. Now these books involved, characters made out of feathers and things like that, but
sure.
Not too elaborate. And then when I was 7, I started playing piano, and then I learned about playing classical music, and that kind of blew my mind open. 8 or 9. When I was 11 or 10, I guess 10 or 11, started playing saxophone. I played alto sax, so I was playing alto sax, playing piano. Went into high school and then picked up some auxiliary percussion. So I was playing auxiliary percussion and marching band and saxophone and piano. I had to drop piano at 14 because it was just a lot. That was a lot plus school. Yeah, it was a lot. And then I went to my undergrad and I got my degree in creative writing, focused mostly on poetry. I haven't really done much with poetry except as a newspaper copy editor for 14 years when I was writing headlines every night. And I found that the skill of writing poetry was extremely helpful because, when you write a headline, you have to find the right words. You have to, I always had to make sure, because I tend to lean towards I like things that sound good and sound cool, but I had to make sure they were the right things, that I was not just sounding good. Like, that's not exactly all we're going for here, but it's nice when you get that as well.
Right.
So you might guess I'm a fan of puns and such. We would always, go with those with our headlines. So anyway, but I'm losing the thread a little bit because in college, I also did a lot of work backstage for the theater. I'm not an actor, will never be an actor, so that wasn't my thing. But I did a lot of work backstage. And I also started singing in the choir, and I hadn't really done that before. And that was exciting. And somebody said, oh, in the choir said, oh, you have a great voice. You should try out for the advanced choir. And I went to this audition. I have never had a singing lesson in my life. I had never auditioned for anything. And I completely bombed it because I had no idea what I was doing. And that was okay though, because then later in my life I did get singing lessons. I was living in LA, Los Angeles, and I went to the community college where they had this really cool applied music program. I was still working as a newspaper copy editor, but I was doing that in my free time, and kind of had the choice at that point, like when I was 30, 31, kind of had to make a decision if I wanted to be a professional singer or not. My teacher really wanted me to go that route, and I realized just my temperament and that's where I was in my life, it just wasn't going to do that. And to be honest, ever since then, I decided that with my singing, at least, I don't want to be paid to do that. Like, you can pay me to write, like, I will, that's my craft, like, or whatever. But as far as where my soul is and my spirit and the real direct link to me as a creative person is definitely through music.
Mhm.
So also in the meantime, I got my master's degree in marriage and family therapy, and I've been a licensed marriage and family therapist here in San Diego since 2017. If your listeners are familiar, and it's okay if you're not, because we don't have to go into it. Maybe we will, maybe we won't, but I'm certified in a type of therapy called EMDR, or eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And I'm also trained in brain spotting, which came from EMDR. So just, I'm really interested in therapy that doesn't just deal with the mind, the brain, and really taps into what's going on with your body, pays attention to that, because I think that a lot of our emotions, as well as inspiration and lots of other things, are in the body.
Mhm.
So yeah, and I'm still singing. Just recently passed an audition for the San Diego Master Chorale, so I'll be starting up with them in the fall. Or I guess when this is out, I will have been with them for a little while, and very excited about that. And I think it's important, especially as somebody who works primarily with creative people, for me to be doing my own creative work at the same time. It's important for me to do that. So that's me in a nutshell.
That's fantastic. And I agree with you 100%. Like I'm sitting here like bouncing on my seat. Like, yes, the mind and body connection that sometimes we kind of lose sight of because we're so focused on behaviors, and we're so focused on just all of the big words that have to do with our mental health, that we sometimes forget that the whole body and mind and soul and spirit, like it's all connected. And so like I'm all about a holistic approach when it comes to counseling and therapy. Yeah. Music is also a huge deal for me. Like I've been a musician since I was,
wow.
I did piano, but it wasn't for me. I didn't love it. I never had a great teacher, but music has always been an outlet for me as well. I picked it up in like 6th grade, I guess, and I'm still playing and loving music. So I'm glad to know we've got that connection. That's pretty cool too. So how did you move from journalism to therapy? What got you into the world of therapy?
So at that time, it was like 2010, and the newspaper industry was melting down, and is still melting. And also, I had just recently gotten married the year before, and my work schedule was like swing shift, like 3 p.m. to midnight, also holidays and weekends oftentimes. So, which honestly worked out pretty well for me. Maybe other creative people who are listening also are night owls. I don't know. It seems pretty common. And but my husband had a regular schedule, and he said, I thought I could do it, but I can't really do it, and things, like I said, things were changing in the industry and at my newspaper in particular, and it just seemed like time to make that switch. And therapy was something that I had been in the back of my mind. My very first therapist in my 20s, I remember him telling me, like, how did you not get into this field? And I'm really glad I waited. Let me just say that much. Because I needed to do some growing up and my own work. So yeah, I mean, it's not really that exciting of a story, but just just time to make a change. And I feel really glad and grateful that both of my main careers I've loved so much and are so fun and creative and all of that. So it's been great.
And that's rare to be able to say, I loved everything that I've ever done with my life. That's not many people can say that.
I've had some bad jobs. I mean,
sure.
But like I said, as far as my main careers,
the main ones. Yeah. The main focus. Yes, absolutely. So, going back and thinking about the mind, body, soul, and that kind of thing. And just sometimes what happens with creatives, we find ourselves with these emotional blocks. Okay, so we're about to jump into the deep end here. Because our creative blocks can sometimes be rooted in these deeper emotional issues, like how do you identify when a creative block is a symptom of a larger emotional challenge, and how do you work through those kinds of things?
It's a great question. I don't think I've ever heard that question quite that way, and I like it. The first thing that popped in my mind was if it seems confusing, right? If you're not sure why you're having this reaction, I mean, because it makes sense. For example, it makes sense to be nervous for an audition, right? I wouldn't call that like an emotional block, right? Sure, everybody's going to feel that way, probably, and to one degree or the other. And yet, if there's something that seems like relatively innocuous, like just like, oh, I think I want to, I mean, even like write a letter to the editor or something. Do you know what I mean? Like something that's kind of lower stakes, and you feel really freaked out about it, or you notice this reaction that seems above and beyond what you might experience normally, that I would get curious. Like if somebody came to me in the therapy room, I would get really curious about that.
Yeah, I know, like for me, I wrote my first book was just kind of a fluke. It was kind of one of those things that I woke up one morning and said, I had a dream, I want to know how it ended. So I decided I was going to write it. And so that's what I did. And I had no problems being like, yeah, I wrote a book. And then the second one comes along and I'm like, oh shoot, can I live up to the same expectations, that everyone raved about the first one? And when I say everybody, I mean like, my mom, and what I mean, like,
I know, yeah.
but the people, it was such positive feedback. I'm like, can I still live up to that? And like I literally had a point at which I just shut down. Like there were no words. Words were just foreign to me. Like speaking words, writing words, I was just like, I got nothing. Don't talk to me. So I found that to be more of a fear, like I had kind of built up inside of myself, some anxiety that I had built up inside of myself. And I had to work through with the several other really wonderful advice giving friends. They were just like, how to write words. You clearly, this is not the first time you've ever written words. And so you have to process those emotions differently sometimes. And sometimes you need somebody to kick you in the pants and be like, Jennifer, come on.
It helps.
Yeah, it does. It does.
Yeah. And I think that, the way that I work, I really conceive of all of us as having these different parts, right? Like there's the part of you that's like, I can write. Of course I can write, like, which probably sounds like an older, more adult, part. And then there are younger parts that it's scary to expose yourself and be vulnerable through art, through creativity, right? And again, that's very reasonable. And it's different when you feel like those younger parts are driving, though, You may not even realize it. Usually we don't realize what's happening. Like I said, it just feels confusing, What might be happening is that those younger parts are like, yeah, no, they're like, yeah, we're not doing that. We're going to stay protected and safe. And which, is really kind of sweet, right? It's really sweet of those parts. And yet they're kids and they don't know that there's an adult in charge. They don't know that actually everybody in this body has a lot more resources, a lot less, worry about survival, for example, like when you're a kid. And we'll probably be okay if we publish this book, right? And so it's really kind of, I work to facilitate like a dialogue. I mean, anybody can do this, write down what the kid's saying, write down what the adult's saying, right? Anybody can do this with themselves, journaling or whatever, or talking to somebody, and really kind of get a dialogue going between those parts of you so that you can reassure the younger part that everything's going to be okay, so that the younger part doesn't have to interfere with this adult business, right?
Yes, at this point, it's better to be seen and not heard, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Exactly. I always say, whenever we work with these parts, I say like, okay, what does this part like to do for fun? Maybe it's like a 3-year-old part, like, I don't know, go out and play and find lizards and stuff. I'm like, great, we can send that part off to play. Yeah. And it can come back if it needs this, but just go have fun. Don't worry about it. And I know it sounds like you get this concept pretty easily. It's it's harder for some folks than others, and it's even hard for me sometimes to like think of myself in that way. But yeah.
No, that's a great analogy. I love the idea. And journaling is something that I do marriage and family counseling, not a therapist. I didn't go to quite that many hours of internship and training, but with my marriage and family counseling clients, I'm always like, journal it, because when you go back and read it, you're seeing it. It's like almost your subconscious has taken over the writing part of it and has written things, and you go back and read it and you're like, oh wow, I can't believe I felt or thought that way. Like it's just a totally different perspective. So putting it in writing sometimes, yes, absolutely. And I think I know for me, I self-edit so badly that even journaling, sometimes I'm like, you just have to take that filter off and run with it. Cause yeah.
Yeah, and as long as you feel safe to do so, right?
Yeah.
Nobody's gonna find it who doesn't need to, and then things
Mhm.
like that. Yeah, no, it can be really helpful. Just allow all those aspects of yourself to have a voice, because that's really what they want. They just want to be heard.
That's right. That's right. So thinking about hurdles that artists face and that kind of thing, how do you help an artist navigate the just societal expectations, not even our self expectations, but how do we help others navigate the pressures that come from outside?
I'm wondering if you're thinking of anything in particular. Like what do you notice? Yeah.
The external so one of the things that I've seen a lot in the author world. Now, granted, I've only been here for 2.5 years. It hasn't been that long that I've seen it, but just observing from the outside, I'm watching authors struggle with trying to, especially self-published authors, that's the world that I'm coming from, trying to find, how do I live up to the same standards that traditional publishers have? How do I find myself, um you know I guess it's really a lot of comparison game, right? Like the pressures to fit this certain mold, where that's why I
Mhm.
became a self-published author, is because I didn't want to fit into that mold, but then there's the pressures to live up to those standards.
That's so interesting, because that's what I was thinking too. I was like, well, I would ask, like, yeah, why do you want to? Like, why do you have to
Yes.
fit into the mold, right? Like, what's important about that, right? So I'm thinking actually too, like, especially for writers, I don't know why, writers, it's like they get the brunt of this. So what have you written? So
Mm.
where can I read what you've written? What are you working on? What do you blah blah blah? And that type of pressure is kind of what I'm sensing, like hearing you talk
Mm.
about, or like who published, there's not so much of like who published you. That's probably like among writers, but like, yeah, like, yeah, where have you been published? Like you know, I had an experience recently in the past few years or whatever, where I wrote a blog post that kind of went viral. Like it had, thousands of views, which for me was a big deal. And I felt really proud of it. Like it's one of the best things I've ever written. And it's so solid. I go back to it year after year and look at it and
Mm.
I'm like, yeah, still holds up. Like I'm just really proud of this. And I don't write a
Yeah.
lot, but when I do, it's kind of a big deal for me. And I remember telling a friend, she was asking about my writing, and I was like, yeah, I had this blog post and it just, kind of went viral. And she's like, oh, well, what, are you writing for anybody else? Are you writing for anybody, other people? And I'm like, I was like, well, I think that actually that's kind of a big deal that like nobody was promoting me, right?
Yes.
And yeah, and I was able to just my sheer words alone, yeah, and I guess I don't feel the need so much to have that validation from like the outside world. I don't think I do anyway.
Yeah.
And yeah, who knows? But
Not
but yeah,
today.
well, that's what I would be curious about too, honestly, is like, okay, what
Mhm.
would that give you? Right. I would
Mhm.
ask the person, like, okay, you feel like you need to live up to these standards of, the publishing houses or whatever. What would that give to you? What is it that you need? And maybe somebody does need to feel like they're part of the establishment, and that's important to them. I'd be like, all right, great. That's a great place to start. Let's see how we can do that.
Mm.
Or let's see, how I can support you to find the resources to be able to make that happen. If it's something else, like if it's more of like an insecurity, then that's something we would look at it in a different way, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And I think social media is one of the driving forces to this whole comparison game anyway. There you look at this one person who, maybe they do have a whole team working for them, but you don't see it, and you see them take off into the stratosphere
Right.
and you start thinking, I'm supposed to be doing that. How am I supposed to do that? I don't know how to do that. Therefore,
Mm.
I'm not going to be a success. And so, we sometimes do kind of make these up in our head that maybe these expectations aren't really there. I don't know, maybe that's just me.
Well, that you said that word success too, and that would be another question I would
Mm.
ask. Okay, what does that mean to you? To give you
Mhm.
an example with my own podcast, it doesn't have a ton of listeners. So I guess in that way, it's not successful. On the other hand, like I wonder, why am I doing it? I'm like, oh, I do it because it's fun, and I do it
Mhm.
because I'm building this like amazing community. I know before
Mhm.
we were recording, we talked about this, the importance of, this idea of communities. And like in that way, it's been an incredible success. And so, and what would it give me if I had more listeners? Like, I don't know. Would it give me that? Not
Mm.
necessarily, you know? It would just give me some more numbers that would make part of my ego feel good, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times that's what we're looking for, is that little tap on the part of the brain that makes you go, "Ooh, look at me, I'm special. I'm standing out for a minute." But one, what's your definition of success? And two, how long is that minute going to last?
Yes, and what comes to my mind is this phrase that I love, which is hedonistic adaptation, which is kind of a mouthful. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's like, yeah, once we reach a certain level, we're just going to be looking for the next level, right?
Yes.
We
Yes, and
adapt. We
that's,
adapt
oh
our
my gosh.
expectations. Yeah.
Yeah, and that is so, it's so tricky also, like whose expectations matter the most. For me, I literally had a conversation with my husband. I think it was earlier this week, it might have been last week, but we were talking about, because I had made the comment, I said, hey, I'd really love to monetize my YouTube channel. And he was like, okay, so let me do some research. And he came back and he was like, yeah, you need like 10,000 followers. And I was like, that's funny, and not possible, and
Right.
so
Right.
it was kind of one of those comparison games that happened in my head immediately. I was like, why am I even doing this then? But like you, it's because I have created this network of people that I can now say, hey, you need to talk to somebody, let me give you somebody's name. Or hey, you need a
Yeah.
lawyer, I've got somebody. That it's a network of support and community,
Mhm.
and I don't think
Mhm.
I would look back and say that any of my work was not worthwhile.
Right, or
Mhm.
that, yeah, or yeah, that it wasn't worth it. Like, of course it is. And I love what you said about, I'm also known as like a connector in my sphere as well, right? And I love that. I love having that role of like, even right before we came on, I was talking to my office mates, and we were helping each other, find resources and have connections. And it's so important, so
It is, because this whole little creative journey can get kind of lonely if you're not careful.
mhm.
So what is one of your favorite stories of breakthrough when working with creatives? Like, do you have one that just pops into your head and goes, this was amazing?
Wow. I can tell you one about my own life. Would that
Do
be
it.
all right? Okay.
Yes.
So when I was, I mentioned in my early 30s, when I was like 30, I was going to the community college program, the applied music program, and learning how to sing essentially. And, the first time I ever got on the stage for my group voice class, my hands were shaking so much and I could not stop them. Like, nothing would stop them. But there was nothing I could do. And I sang my little song and sat down. Well, after I did some private lessons and continued, was in choir, was in the group class too. I worked really, really, really hard on this one aria from Samson and Delilah, and it's in French. Um, uh, it's very cool. It fit my voice really well too, so it was great. And we were required to practice in the practice rooms there on campus 9 hours a week, right? And so, which worked out really well for me. It was good to have that outside motivator. So I had to be there doing that every week, and I worked really, really hard on this one song. And so then I was in my lesson toward the end of the semester. I was in my lesson with my teacher. She's at the piano, accompanying me, and I sing through my aria. And at the end, she's crying. I'm crying. And she looks at me and she says, "You could sing that on any stage in the world." And I looked at her and I said, "I know. This is true." And you know what I realized in that moment? Like, I didn't have to. I didn't want to. That's all I needed. I was like, okay, great.
Oh, ooh, I got chilled on that one. Like,
Oh.
I just, ooh, I love that. Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
that's
I
just kind
like,
of a,
right, and who knew that, like, I didn't need, like, a crowd of adoring, applauding people. Like, I'd realized I don't need that for myself. It probably wouldn't really matter as much to me as just knowing that I worked so hard,
mm,
and that I did fulfill my potential. That's been a really important thing for me in my life, is like, okay, what is my potential? And I'm totally fine with like finding my limits, right? Like, I want to
yeah.
know. you know like in my career, my first career, I had a phone interview with the New York Times, and like that was as high as I got because I didn't want to be there and they didn't want me there, so it was like mutual. It's like, I belong on the West Coast, clearly, after that chat. Um, and so that was great. So I knew, like, I'm like, okay, I've gone as far as I can go. Good to know. Good to know, you know? And I kind of felt that way with this, even though I still enjoy singing and I enjoy challenging myself. It was just really nice to know, like, okay, I've probably reached the top for me. And, you know, that's great.
That's fantastic. And just to have that, I don't know, just that insight to yourself that I know, like that's
Yeah.
what hit
Yeah.
me was that I know, you know, because we're always searching for the, you know, what can I do better? How can I do better? And it's like, no, this is my best. Like,
This
how
is my
many of us
best.
have
Yeah.
ever, it's so hard to ever say that, you know, because I think it goes back to, we compare ourselves to, well, their best looks very different from my best. And we think we
Right.
have to find what they're doing when it's like, that's not what you were built for. You know, that'd be like putting me on a running track. You're going to put me out there and want to see my best. Trust me, my first lap will be my best and the only. You know what I mean?
The only. That's it. That's all you get. Yeah, well,
I'll
and
be my
and
best.
funny enough, you know, after that experience, I did sing it again for juries. So that's where you sit in front of a panel, you sing in front of a panel, and there's like people in the audience, and I didn't do as well, you know. And so maybe for me, like, and I was kind of fine with that too, you know, because I was like, maybe for me, it was that moment, like, to have that moment in life was enough, you know. And if I wanted to, I knew I could pursue it more, and I didn't want to for various reasons that I talked about before a little bit. So yeah.
Mm, mm, that is awesome. So shifting gears just a little bit, when I was doing my research, as I like to call another day in the office, I was reading about your emphasis on sensitivity and how it's kind of a driving force for creativity. And it just kind of
Mhm.
intrigued me, because I know that I can be sensitive about my own art, and it can vary on the spectrum from day to day how sensitive I am and how much sensitivity I put into my art. So, like, talk more about that, like, elaborate on how individuals can transform their relationship with their own sensitivity and from a source of vulnerability and that kind of thing, and turn it into like a source of strength.
Sure. Well, I think it sounds like you're referencing the blog post I wrote about talking with Gabor Mate, who is pretty big in the therapy world. I think he recently talked to Prince Harry, so that's like a big deal. Anyway, I had the opportunity just sort of randomly to talk to him and ask him questions, and I asked him. I said, you know, this was several years ago. You know, I said, for me and for many of my clients, we think that our creativity, our creative expression comes from our trauma, perhaps, you know.
Mm,
We think that because we had a tough childhood, now, you know, now we're this like real deep poet or whatever, or songwriter, or, you know, whatever it is. And he immediately was like, no, 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 you're wrong. I was like, great, tell me the answer, right? Like, I want to know. And that's what he said. He said, no, your creativity does not come from your trauma. It
mm,
comes from your sensitivity, you know. And he said, and that's inborn, according to him. It's not your trauma, it's inborn. It's like you have, you know, green eyes, or you know, brown hair or whatever. Like, you are more sensitive than other people, and that's where it comes from. And you're right. I think I intuited from what you were saying that it's kind of a double-edged sword.
mhm,
You know, on the one hand, like for me personally, like I can be, like, for example, extremely moved by a piece of music. Like, I there was a time in my life, not so recently, when I just had to, like, for example, stop listening to Radiohead because it was messing me up. Too sensitive, too intense. Okay, we need to just back off from that for a moment. Um, and you know, the sensitivity can also be, it sounds like, I was kind of hearing you say, like, sensitivity to criticism too.
mm.
Was that kind of what you were implying? I don't know.
Yeah, there's kind of, you know, it kind of comes from both places.
Both places.
From your, it's an inspiration, but you're also affected by it, right? Like
Yeah.
it can come on both sides, like you said, a
Yeah,
double-edged
exactly.
sword.
It can, yeah, a double-edged sword. Yeah, two sides of the same coin. Yeah, on the one
Mhm,
hand, it helps. I think it helps us be more attuned to the world, and you know, certain things about it that other people may not see. Right. I think that's part of what can make people who consider ourselves creative. I think that's part of what can make us different, is that we see, hear, feel things differently from, let's say, the, you know, vast majority of
mhm,
other people. That also can be isolating,
mhm.
as you mentioned before, right? It can be lonely being a creative person, and that's the other side of it. And that's why I think community is so important, to come back to that as well. You know, knowing we're not alone, and knowing that, it's okay to be sensitive, and that's where our strength comes from. That's where our specific view and expression comes from. That's a beautiful thing.
Mhm. Yeah, but it does require some vulnerability. Like, you have to be willing to open up, and say, hey, yeah, I am a sensitive person. But if you're going to share that with somebody, whoo, sometimes that requires a little splitting open of the chest and a little pouring out. And that's not always easy either.
Well, and it should be really, I think that as individuals, we should take that very seriously and be
Mhm.
very discerning as well. For example, in the book, The Artist Way, which is a workshop that I, facilitate, this book, The Artist Way by Julia Cameron, she says, like, don't show your early work to people. That's like creative child abuse is what she calls it. It's not, if something's not ready to be exposed to the world, like, keep it safe. And so, yeah, I think that's why it is important that we really consider how, when, where we want to share these things, not to the point, this is the catch-22, right? Because it's like not to the point of blocking ourselves.
Oh, yep.
But yeah.
Well, yeah, and sometimes, you think the ones closest to you are the ones that you can trust the most even. And sometimes you get a little more pushback from them because they think, well, I'm just going to be honest with them because I want what's best for them. And so then you've got that, I don't want to say trauma, but at the same time, it can be a little traumatic. And you're like,
yes, it is. Yes.
it is trauma. And you're
Yeah.
just like, I think I should shut down. I don't think if these people closest to me aren't going to accept and embrace, then, why would I go to somebody I don't know as well or who I'm not as close to? So
yeah, they might kick me out of the group. Yeah, I mean it's a very primal response, and it may not be rational, and yet it's enough to block us sometimes.
It really is. So do you encourage collaborations, thinking about community and that kind of thing, and finding these people that you can trust? Do you encourage artists to collaborate, or do you think it's safer not to collaborate? Or
That's funny. It's funny you mentioned that because I had somebody tell me recently, like, for me in particular, she says, you need to have creative control over your projects. Yeah, that's not to say that I don't bring people in. I mean, my podcast is like yours, I interview people, like, that's what I do. And so I'm collaborating in that way. As far as the decision-making part, though, when it comes to how it's going to be presented, that's all on me, which works for me. For other people, it might be different. For other people, they may need a different thing. Now, I will say, as far as like my singing goes, to go back to that, like, I love being in a group when I'm singing. Like, I love singing with other people. That kind of collaboration is very important to me. And like during the pandemic, I didn't really sing much because I didn't want to do it alone. It didn't really mean much of anything. I was doing private lessons, but even then it's like, what's the point? I don't, yeah. So it depends on what you're doing, and yeah, kind of like what your expectations are, what your goals are. I think, I don't know. Does that make sense?
oh yeah, oh yeah. Some people, they say that collaboration is the way to go, and I'm like you though. To me, I will gladly encourage and walk alongside, and you're welcome to walk next to me too. But when it comes to my art, there's a good chance that you can give me feedback, but I'm going to make the final choice and decision on most of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, which I think, is important. Like, there needs to be somebody leading, right? There needs to be a leader with a project, any kind of project. And that leader needs to take the responsibility of making the choices. So I think that's fine. Yes. It was funny. Before we got on today, I was talking to some colleagues, and we were talking about being on boards, like nonprofit boards for therapists and other things. And both my friend and I were like, yeah, we don't really work very well on boards. It's like, we do not do like decisions by consensus, or however you call that. It's like, nah. It's because I don't know. It's like, I feel too passionately about some things, It's like, I want to do them a certain way. And I admire people who can do that type of thing, but it's not me.
It's not me either. You're not alone.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So tell us about the support group, the support group for creatives, the Artist Way workshop that you have and that you host.
Sure. Yeah. So the Artist Way workshop, usually run it once a year online, and we go for 12 weeks, usually on Friday mornings, Pacific time, anyway, mornings. And yeah, what we do is we go through each chapter of the book, The Artist Way. And really, it's funny because it's about art, it's about creativity. And as she says in the book, like, if you want to work on your art, work on your life. We were talking about holistic things earlier. I mean, it's all connected. And so a lot of the book and a lot of what we do is just really talk about like some of the myths, about artists and creatives. You're talking about those expectations from people outside of, the one thing to kind of go back to that a little bit. The one thing I try to remind myself is like, oftentimes the loudest critics are the people who actually aren't doing the work. Somebody might be super critical about your book. Are they writing a book? Do they know what it takes? Probably not,
Accurate.
So, yeah. So I try to remind myself of that, because I know that if they did do it, then they would know. And then they would have maybe some more constructive feedback for me. But if they've never done it, like, I don't know how serious I would take like some of that outside feedback. Yeah.
Yes, no, that is fantastic. I never really thought about it. I mean, like, I live that way. Like, I just never really put it into words that, because I have found a deeper empathy and such when it comes to working with other authors and talking to other authors, because, I can think of several creatives, mostly authors, who have told me, they've been working on the same piece of art for years, if not a decade, and they have this fear of not being good enough, and they still just haven't shared it with anyone. And I think, on the one hand, I get it. Like, I get it, because you want it to be so good. You want it to be so, just ready to be accepted by everybody. But at the same time, I'm going, 10 years is a long time to be holding on to something. So, yeah, I think having a workshop where they can talk about these things, I think that's a fantastic idea.
Yeah, it's really, and the cool thing is like, the very first meeting is always my least favorite, because nobody knows anybody and it's all kind of awkward and I'm kind of awkward, et cetera, et cetera. And I always just can't wait until it's a 12-week workshop, and I always can't wait until like week 9, because that's when like the group like really gels and people really feel connected to one another, and it's just such a beautiful experience. It's like my favorite thing to do in the world, really, is to run these workshops and watch that magic happen. It's only there's only one time when it didn't really happen, but I've run.
There's always an exception.
There's always an exception, yeah. But I've done this, for many years, and seen it over and over again, and it's really a beautiful thing. And so, yeah.
That's awesome. What else do you want to talk about?
That's a great question.
What's popping into your head? I've asked
I don't
questions.
know.
It's your turn.
I know. In my podcast, I call it the final question, and I always say, like, I'm trying to find a more creative title for it, but really, like, what my final question is: what was there anything else that you want to share with our listeners? I don't know. I guess what pops in my head, honestly, is just like to say that you're not alone, to tell your listeners that you're not alone. And if you're looking for therapy, like, find somebody who at least is interested in understanding why creativity and art making are important to you. Because in my experience, a lot of therapists don't understand that, and they think it's like a hobby, and maybe it is a hobby for you. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but like, sometimes, like, art feels like life or death to some of us, and that needs to be acknowledged and validated. Because that's our sensitivity, right? That's part of who we are, and it's very important. So I would say just find somebody who at least lines up with you in that way. They don't have to be artists themselves at all, but I think that's important, that at least they can have some understanding or interest in understanding why it's important to you.
Oh yeah, I mean, and it's just like you would if you were someone who struggles with ADHD, or someone who struggles with depression, or someone with anxiety, you want a therapist or a counselor who's going to be able to relate to that, and to meet you where you are. The same is true for if you're a creative. It's no different. Not that being a creative is a mental health risk of sorts, but we have a very different way of processing the world, of seeing the world, and like you said, our sensitivities are very different. And so you definitely need somebody who can speak to that side of you, and understand it, and not think you're just eccentric, because that's not always the case.
Yeah, that would be so dismissive, or
Yeah.
just yeah, just not getting it,
Mhm.
it can be hard. So as a therapist, like I want to be the type of therapist that I would want to go to, That's my
Yes.
goal. Yeah.
That's fantastic. And I think that I would definitely be calling you if I lived a lot closer, but I think Alabama might be kind of a commute.
That's very sweet. Well, yeah, thank you. And that is something important actually to know that yeah, I'm licensed in California and Montana, interestingly enough, so not Alabama. But yeah, there are pretty strict rules in the US about who can see therapists, even though we do a lot of what we call telehealth, video
Mhm.
therapy. Yeah, you have to find somebody who's licensed where you physically are located. That's how it
Yeah.
is for California anyway. So yeah, it's interesting. It's a little frustrating, honestly, but and that may be changing, but we'll see.
Tell us how listeners can connect with you and your work.
You bet. So you can find me at my website, which is rachelmoorecounseling.com. And I'm also on Facebook and Instagram. Just look up Rachel Moore LMFT, and you should be able to find me there. Yeah, and I'm currently, as we're recording, I'm switching the way I do things. So I'm hoping I'll still have an option for people to go to my website, and if they want to chat with me for like 15 minutes, they can schedule a time. And I like helping people find therapists. So even in other states, I can ask around and see if people can help you. So yeah, schedule a time to chat if you like, or drop me an email. And yeah, and in the Artist Way group, there's a link, or excuse me, a page on my website about the Artist Way workshop, and you can check that out. Anybody can attend that, because I don't run it as a therapy group. I run it as a support group. It's not therapy. I'm very clear about that. And so anybody from the world can attend, and we've had people from all around the world attend, which is really fun.
And that registration is always open, or it opens at a specific time?
Yeah, usually opens in January
Okay.
every year, so it should be open then.
Perfect. Fantastic. Well, Rachel, thank you for hanging out and being part of this conversation. I know that anybody listening could walk away with something encouraging or educational, and hopefully some resources that they can plug into at some point when they need them.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And by the way, I was going to say too about the Artist Way, I do have a newsletter, so you can go to,
Yeah.
so you can go to the Artist Way page and sign up for the newsletter. You can get announcements when it's starting. But yeah, thank you so much for this conversation. I love talking about this stuff, and it was so wonderful to find you and get hooked up. Like right when I saw your podcast and what you do, I thought, yeah, I gotta reach out to her. So thank you so much for having me on.
Oh yeah, no, it's a perfect connection, and all of the information about how to contact you and get on your newsletter and all of that jazz. It's going to be in the show notes. So as you're listening, if you want to go poke around and click on those links, then by all means, because I know that she's going to have exactly what you need. If you've heard this and been like, I need to talk to somebody, she's either the one to talk to, or she will find you somebody, is what I heard.
Yes, I will help. Yes. Yeah, I'm pretty busy, but
Perfect.
I will help you find somebody. Yeah.
That's awesome. I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I really appreciate it too.